Hey, welcome to the Leadership Lifter, where we're lifting the lids of leaders in the local church. I'm Jason Hanash, your host, and today we have on the podcast Chris Sonksen, the author of Saving Your Church from Itself, the 6 Subtle Behaviors That Tear Teams Apart, and How to Stop Them. You're in for a treat today. Let's jump in. Hey, we're here with Chris Sonksen, the author of Saving Your Church from Itself, an amazing resource. I know I've read it. My team has gone through it. Chris, happy to have you on the Leadership Lifter podcast today.
Boom. No, thanks so much, dude. It's awesome to be on here. I always love hanging out with you, especially that beautiful peppered beard of yours. It's
getting more and more salty as the years go on. That's for sure, man. I know that's why you don't grow yours out.
No, I look like Saint Nick.
Hey, there's a few concepts, actually quite a bit. These 6 behaviors that tear teams apart and how to stop them. There's quite a bit of content in there, but there's one in particular I wanted to poke your brain about today, and it has to do with the first and second chair and leader drift. So if we can lean in to that portion of this book and kind of explain what the first and second chair is and the tension that exists there.
Yeah. So here's the bottom line is that everybody sits most often in the first and second chair at the same time. So you're a first chair leader, but you also might serve an organization or help an organization like I help Convoy. So I sit in the second chair in Convoy. But I sit in the first chair of this side of my life. But here's the real thing is that there is a natural tension that happens in ministry, especially in churches, between the first and second chair. Because you often have maybe campus pastors or high-level leaders, executive leaders. They have the second chair title with the first chair responsibility.
Right.
And to go even farther, they have the second chair title with the first chair abilities.
Yeah.
And that's where the tension's created. Now, it isn't a problem that you solve, it's a tension that you constantly manage because it's never going to go away. It's as old as the Bible and to this day. So you got a first chair leader, say the lead pastor, whatever, then they've got the second chair, all these second chair leaders. And there's this natural tension. So here's a few areas where the tension shows up. It's a tension between authority and submission at the same exact time.
Right.
Which is really interesting because you're a campus pastor or whatever, and you've got all this authority, but you have to submit and you have to do it at the same time. You have a tension between creativity and boundaries at the same time. You have a tension between your strength and your leader's weakness at the same exact time. You have a strength between you or a tension between your personal opinion and the pastor's direction at the same time. So there's this constant, and the one more is that there's a tension between balancing the influence you're gaining and the loyalty you have to give all at the same time. Yeah. You're gaining influence, you're gaining loyalty from people, but you gotta give it to the pastor. So there's this enormous amount of tension that I don't think I think that we often miss or we don't address or we just act like it's not there. Jesus addressed it in Matthew 10, verse 1. He said to the disciples, "All authority I give you." Then he turns around in verse 39 and says, "Oh, by the way, if you really want to live, you got to die to yourself." Well, which one is it?
Right.
Do I have all the authority or I got to die to myself? And he's like, yes, both at the same time. So there's this natural tension. So because of that tension, if you're not guarding your heart and you're not guarding your mind, it'll lead you to leader drift. Right. And leader drift is the subtle negative behavior or attitude toward a leader or the vision. The subtle negative attitude or behavior. But the key word is it's subtle. That's the key word, Jason.
Right.
It's subtle. It's that little man, I don't know what's going on here, but I can tell something's happening with that guy.
Right.
Okay.
What are some signs that you see? Like what? Because it's so subtle.
It's
If we're not managing the tension, you're gonna drift. You're gonna leader drift. So what does that look like, and how does it show up? Help some leaders out here that are kind of sensing something,
yeah,
but they don't know how to put their finger on it.
yeah. It's the worst, isn't it? Wouldn't you rather? It's so much easier if it's blatant, like,
Right.
okay, dude, you're an alcoholic and you stole $50,000 from the church. Okay, that's clear. Like,
Right. Right.
yeah, that's a problem, second chair. But when it's like, it's you can sense it, but it's not enough for you to go.
Yeah.
It's anyway. So I think there's a few things. I think there's things like that you have to watch. Um, they come with more questions than they do solutions, or
Mm.
more judgment than they do solutions.
Mm.
They seem to be secretly kind of off with other people sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you one, because I've went through it in a bad way. I noticed after a while that person that kind of spun out on me no longer brought a notepad when they met with me because they thought I had nothing to say to them.
Yes.
And so
Wow.
it's the little thing you're looking for, like, oh, you're different in the meeting. You're
Mm.
not asking great questions anymore. You're having a questioning spirit.
Mm.
That there's
That's a subtle difference.
it's change. It's just going like this. It's just something's happening. And I think as leaders, we see further, faster, and farther than everybody. Well, we should than other people, but it's those little things. It's those little tweaks. Like something's going wrong here, and
Right.
you're picking up on it. Again, how it's happening in the meeting, words that they're saying, shifting from having questions to having a questioning spirit, little things like that, where it's like something's going on. And I think,
Yeah.
man, if you don't address it, here's the thing:
Yeah.
if the rest of the team starts noticing it, it's almost too late.
Yeah.
It's almost like,
Yeah.
really, you're the one that's got to notice, like something's going on. By the time everybody notices it, one thing I always say, man, is you're in front of the eight ball when they care about the relationship with you. You're no longer, or when you're behind the eight balls when they no longer care about the relationship with you. I think I
Right.
got to that point.
Yeah.
I thought about that before. I got to that point with that
Yeah.
person. So just watching those little things, something changing, something
Right.
shifting, and addressing it early on, because it doesn't typically just self-correct.
Right. What does that look like to address those subtle behaviors, the leader drift that we experience? What are some tips maybe that you have that when we to address the subtleties in a very wise way?
Yeah. Here's the way I love addressing conflict, and I'll just role play as if you're the staff member and I'm the pastor.
This will
Say,
be
hey,
fun.
Jason, and I get two things I do. I get right into it, and then I turn the table right on them. And I learned
Okay.
that from my own coach. So, hey, Jason, I've just been noticing in the staff meeting that your questions are starting to change. I've noticed that maybe you show up a little bit later, or you just don't seem to have, and something's telling me that something's going on in your heart. Can you speak into that for me? Within 30
Mm.
seconds, I'm into the power phrase. Can you speak into that for me?
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
one of two things are going to happen. Either one, they're going to completely deny it, but they know your
Mhm.
antenna's up. So at least they know, even if they deny it. But what I had to do this just a couple months ago with someone, and bro, it was like 6 minutes long. They're like, well, da, 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 da. And in
Yeah.
the middle of it, after I said, can you speak into it? They said the word bad attitude. And then when they got done, I said, you said the phrase bad attitude. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Mhm.
I didn't say you had a bad attitude.
Mhm.
I got you to say that you have it. And now I'm asking you to expand on that more. So
Right.
asking questions is really key. And even if they just deny they still know, like, your antenna's up, man. You better be careful.
Yeah. And it's addressing those, having the courage, the bravery to kind of address the subtleties
Yeah.
before it manifests into something aberrant and then infects the rest of the team.
Yep. And it always
We,
will. I think the worst thing you can do for your strong leaders is to tolerate a weak one. And
mm,
it's the worst thing you can do because they see it. They're just not telling you.
Right.
They see it. They're just not telling you. And I always tell people, and believe me, I learned this the hard way. Pay now or pay later, but if you pay later, you'll always pay more.
That's right. So what as you're talking about team dynamics here, and in the book you mentioned within this context of leader drift, the pitfalls that church teams they have to avoid in this context. What are some of those pitfalls that you see that
Yeah.
church teams have to avoid?
Yeah. Well, what they need to avoid there's a couple of things. I think they're pitfalls. They're areas that you got to keep your eye open for. One is shifting from, again, we already said it, but shifting from asking questions to having a questioning spirit. I think that's a dangerous place to be. I think they have to be careful when they start seeing alliances being formed. I think that's a dangerous place. Something's going on when you start to notice alliances are being formed.
Okay.
That's a dangerous place to go. When isolation starts picking up. Prodigal son comes back, older brother's out in the field, and he's all upset because he'll start to distance himself. Distance leads to discontentment, and discontentment will lead to discord. So you have to catch it at the distance part where you're like, something's going on. So now there's distance going on. There's isolation going on. And you have to recognize it as the person, as the lead pastor or the leader, or whatever, the first chair. First chair needs to recognize it in the second chair. Second chair needs to recognize it in their own heart that something's wrong here. They need to have the maturity to be able to say, I feel my heart's drifting. And they need to go get it right. I think another thing is that a real dangerous pitfall is when you begin to weaponize your preference with spirituality.
Yeah.
We hear it all the time. Well, brother, I just wish you were more verse by verse. I love my pastor, but I wish he was more. I love my pastor. I just wish he was more, and here's the reality is what you're saying is your thing is more spiritual and you're weaponizing your preference with spirituality so no one can argue with it.
Right.
And people do that. And it's a dangerous place to be. And those are some of the pitfalls. I think you just have to be really careful.
Yeah, whether it's the preferences of what we should be doing in ministry or should not be doing in ministry, or a leadership style, to weaponize your preference, your personality, your gifting within the body of Christ as somehow more spiritual.
Yeah. And then when you say your gifting, that sparks another thought. 100% agree with you. It's always interesting to me, like I said earlier, there's a tension between your strength and the leader's weakness.
Yeah.
What's interesting is you never judge someone else's weakness unless it's your strength.
Yeah.
So that's the only reason you're judging it, is because there's a difference there. But you got to be careful. First chair has to recognize it. Second chair has to recognize it. And they can't. It's a dangerous place if a second chair leader starts to internalize these kind of thoughts. Man, I love the church. I tolerate the pastor. Dangerous. Yeah. Things would be better if I was in charge. Dangerous. Do whatever you want the rest of the church. Leave my department alone. Dangerous. I'm telling you, it's going down a wrong path. And it's funny, whenever I share this, I just shared this yesterday in Arizona at a conference. And I said, everybody, at the end, I'm like, everybody here is in 1 of 3 spots. Either A, my team's great. They all love me. And I say, okay, it's coming though. And or B, man, I'm going through it right now. Or C, where were you a year ago?
Yeah, that's right.
I already went through all this. But everybody's going to go through it, man. I mean, everybody goes through it. And,
before you speak to because I want you to speak to the heart of, or the action of, a leader who's recognizing some things. Before I do that, though, I would like just to take a moment for you to speak to the heart of someone in the second chair who is maybe listening to this and going, that sounds like maybe me. I feel like I might be drifting. Can you speak to that heart, maybe how the second chair leader should respond if this might be hitting home?
Yeah, I think that, man, if there's a second chair leader listening right now and there is anything in your heart that is putting up a red flag, a statement I love to use is pay attention to the tension. Something's wrong there. And what you'll do is you'll start going down journey or the path of justification. You'll start justifying it. Then you'll probably find one or two people in the church who will kind of toot your horn a little bit, tell you how great you are. I love when the pastor speaks, but when you fill in, you have got to be careful. Yeah. It is never your job to replace what God put in place. And I think second chair leaders are like, well, and they feel that coming in there. Watch it, because here's what's happening. I always say, you've heard me say this before, when the enemy takes over your church, he doesn't do it through those who attend it. He'll do it through those who lead it. Right. Don't think we justify it. All of a sudden it's like, my heart's right. And I just want to start a church, and I just want to do this. And, I want to move the block down the way and start a church. And isn't it better that there's more churches in the city? And all these excuses we come up with. And I'm just like, everything, it sounds so right. And I don't want to get super spiritual or get into the hierarchies of the spirit, but doesn't the scripture say that the enemy comes as an angel of light? It makes sense to us. Why? Yeah. Look, another church is starting. Isn't that great for the city? And we start to justify it in our mind. Don't do that. If you're a second chair leader, give honor, give loyalty. And if you can't give honor and you can't give loyalty, then with the head held high and the best respect, exit out of that church. Get into a different place where you can give honor and loyalty. That's okay. That's all right. Sometimes you don't line up with people, and that's okay. But give honor, give loyalty. Do not go down that path and then think in your mind, and somehow you're justifying what 5 years ago you said you would never do.
Yep. I think if anyone, a second chair leader also who's thinking about, I better than just transition from here honorably, then I would caution to be very careful to transition for what I see is people, oftentimes leaders transition for vain reasons, not value reasons. It's just a very, our own ambition, our own preference, our own personality. Now, if you can't line up, you got to go ahead and shift and find somewhere that you can. Absolutely. But just make sure that you're putting your heart before God. Absolutely. And this is the will of God and not the will of your flesh. It needs to be a value reason, not a vain reason.
Absolutely.
So what then maybe for the leader then, a leader who's sees some of the leader drift and the tension, what are some great just action steps today, or tomorrow? I got to deal with this. How can they deal with it?
Yeah, a few things I would say. Number one is pay attention to the tension. If you see it, you feel it, something's happening there. Secondly, I tell them, set the appointment and have the difficult conversation. Just rip the Band-Aid, it ain't going to be easy. Anybody that says, I look forward to conflict, I'm like, you shouldn't be in ministry then. But I don't look forward to it, but I know I have to do it. So have the difficult conversation and then choose the right path. The right path might be, and I always go in with an A and a B. I'm like, if the guy responds great or gal responds great or whatever, great. Let's go down that path. If they don't respond great, I might go down a different path. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I'm going to choose the best God-honoring direction. Right. But I'm also going to do everything I can to protect this church and this ministry. I'm not going to let it just keep going. So I tell everybody all the time, pay attention to the tension, set the appointment to have the difficult conversation, choose the right path. But don't put off the difficult conversation. My personal coach tells me all the time, always remember, Chris, and he goes, a piece of fruit that goes sour doesn't become sweet again. He goes, if you let it go too far, it's not coming back. And I'm not saying God can't do it. I'm not saying God can't get the victory. Right. But I think you have to be honest. Is this gone too far? What needs to happen? Don't fall into the trap that we all do of choosing friendship over leadership. You got to make a leader decision, even though you like the person, but if you know what's happening. But have the difficult conversation. Be ready to choose the right course of action. Make sure it's all covered with grace and humility, right? But assuredness that you're moving in the right direction. If our job is shepherd, then what's the job of the shepherd? Protect the sheep, and that's his job from something that looks like a wolf. And I heard one time T.D. Jakes say, he goes, "There's a Judas at every table," and I was like, Wow. Whether that's true on every table or not, or that's his opinion, but I just think really I take away from that is just keep your antenna up and be careful. So, that you don't let it go too far and you end up hurting. I done that. I did that.
Yeah.
I've done that at least once or twice in my ministry where I was like, that went way too far. And that caused way more damage than it should have caused. And that's because I didn't deal with it. It was my fault.
Yep. Yeah. Guys, you gotta read this book, Saving Your Church from Itself: 6 Behaviors That Tear Teams Apart and How to Stop Them. Chris, I love it. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and blessing us today, man.
Cool. Thank you, man. It's an honor.